I stared at the email in disbelief. The words, "We regret to inform you," burning into my chest like a brand. Elimination. That's what they called it. Not fired, not laid off. Just gone. Erased. All those late nights, the sacrifices, the loyalty. I'd given all for nothing. And the worst part? They didn't even have the decency to tell me face to face. They replaced me with someone cheaper. Someone who hadn't earned what I had. Anger flooded me, but beneath it was something darker, a raw guttural betrayal. They thought I'd fade away. They thought they could toss me aside without a second thought. But they were wrong. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And I would make them regret underestimating me. Hi, I'm Jake, and this is my story. It's funny, isn't it, how easily you can go from feeling like you're on top of the world to realizing that world was built on sand. One minute I was climbing the ladder. The next I was watching it slip away beneath me. I never considered myself a risk taker. I wasn't the type to chase after the next big thing or jump into something without thinking. I worked hard, really hard. And I thought that would be enough. It had to be. Hard work had always paid off, hadn't it? That's what I told myself anyway. I've been at the company for nearly 5 years now. A steady, reliable cog in a machine that never really seemed to care whether it had me or not. The work was grueling, but I was used to that. I had long since accepted the endless deadlines, the late nights, the emotional exhaustion. I didn't mind. I didn't need the praise. What mattered to me was knowing that I was doing my part, that I was contributing. The company's success was my success, or at least, that's what I convinced myself of. But the tension had been creeping in for months. I could feel it before I saw it, like a knot tightening in my chest every time I walked through the door. Something was different. At first, it was subtle. A few less emails, a few less tasks, a few less invitations to the important meetings. I didn't think much of it. Things were busy. Maybe they just didn't need me as much anymore. I'm good at pushing things down, you know? At ignoring the little things that gnaw at you. But when you're the last one to know about major changes, when you're the one left out of the conversations that matter most, you start to notice. That's when the real weight starts to sink in. When you stop getting included in the big decisions, when you're just left to sit at your desk, minding your own business, and waiting for someone to tell you why you're not on the same page anymore. I started feeling like I was in the background. The team wasn't what it used to be, and I didn't have the energy to fight for a seat at the table. So I did my work, head down, fingers typing away. I didn't want to rock the boat. I wasn't looking for drama, wasn't looking for attention. I just wanted to keep doing what I'd always done. But the whispers started, and not the good kind. You know the kind, the ones you hear when people think you're not listening, when they think you've tuned out. But you've heard just enough to make you wonder. Have you seen the new guy? They say he's fast. I heard they're looking to make some changes, streamline things a little. Yeah, but what about my name? He's been here forever. Little comments, little glances that weren't meant for me but were impossible to ignore. I tried to brush them off. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I could feel it, like a cold draft sneaking into a room, silent and steady, just waiting for you to acknowledge it. The worst part? I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. I'd gotten too comfortable, too complacent. I'd let myself get lost in the routine. I didn't even realize how much I had invested in something that wasn't built to last. I wasn't blind. I knew the company was cutting costs. That's how businesses operate, right? But something about the way they were doing it, the way they were doing it to me, felt personal. I kept telling myself it wasn't, that I was overthinking things, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. I had put everything into this job. I'd stayed late, taken on extra projects, helped train new hires. And for what? So that when the time came, I'd be the one left behind, just another face in the crowd. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was waiting for a phone call that would change everything. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I could feel it coming. And somehow I was both bracing myself for the worst and hoping I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong. Not at all. It hit like a ton of bricks. I remember the day like it was yesterday. The call came at around 3 p.m., a sharp contrast to the quiet buzz of the office. My phone buzzed once and then again, and I knew before I looked that it was HR. I had been waiting for it, sure, but nothing could have prepared me for how it felt to finally see their name on the screen. I had hoped for a moment that it was some sort of mistake. Maybe they just needed some clarification on something. Or perhaps I had misunderstood the whispers that had been growing louder in the past weeks. I picked up the phone, the tension in my shoulders already a warning sign of what was to come. "Name's Ice, this is Sarah from HR. Are you available to speak for a moment?" "Yeah, of course." My voice felt foreign, even to me. Calm, detached, like I was outside of my body. "Thank you. So we've been reviewing our team structure, and after a lot of consideration, we've decided to make some changes. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated." There was a pause on the line. It didn't register immediately. My brain didn't know how to process what I was hearing. Elimination. It felt like a word you only hear in the worst-case scenarios, not something you ever expect to apply to yourself. "Wait, what?" My voice cracked. "Yes. It's effective immediately. We'll be providing you with a severance package, and we can discuss the details tomorrow. You'll need to return your company equipment today." Her words were quick, rehearsed. I could hear the detachment in her voice, the coldness that made it clear this wasn't a decision she had to make, but one she was simply relaying. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, like my body was trying to reject what had just been told to me. I felt frozen, unable to speak, the knot in my stomach twisting tighter with every word. My thoughts scrambled, trying to latch onto something, anything, that would explain what was happening. I don't understand. I managed to choke out. How could this happen? These decisions are difficult, but we're focusing on cutting costs. We've found a more affordable option to fill your role. Affordable. The word stung, and with it came the sudden, nauseating realization. The new guy, the one who had been brought in a few months ago, the one who I had noticed, but hadn't thought much about. It wasn't just about cutting costs. It was about replacing me with someone cheaper, someone younger, more willing to bend the rules if it meant getting ahead, someone who would be easier to discard when the time came. I could feel my chest tightening, the sharp pain of betrayal running through me like a hot wire. All the years of hard work, the late nights, the sacrifice, it all meant nothing. In the sea. And I wasn't irreplaceable, I was disposable. And that's when the anger started bubbling up. At first it was a trickle, but it didn't take long to flood me entirely. The words coming from Sarah's mouth felt like they were moving through, molasses, each one sinking deeper into the pit of my stomach, churning and twisting. "So that's it then?" I finally asked, my voice low, steady, and filled with venom. No warning, no conversation, just, "Replace me?" There was another pause, longer this time. "I know this is difficult," she said almost apologetically. "But the decision has been made. You will be receiving an email with the details of your severance." I didn't say anything for a moment. What was there to say? I wasn't going to beg for my job back, not after that. Instead, I felt this strange, hollow numbness start to fill me. The betrayal felt so complete, so final. "Fine," I said, the word coming out colder than I intended. "I'll pack up my things and send them over. I'll be expecting the details." And I hung up. The room around me felt suddenly too small. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow. I could feel the anger and frustration building inside, mixing with this deep, heavy sadness. It was like being punched in the chest and left to suffocate on the floor. I stood up from my desk, the familiar hum of the office now alien, a noise that only reminded me of how everything had just slipped through my fingers. The coworkers I'd seen every day for years, the ones I thought were friends, didn't even look at me as I packed my things. I don't know if they knew, if they were trying not to notice, or if they were just too absorbed in their own worlds to care. But I knew. I knew they were all in on it. They were all complicit in this, the ones who had been watching, waiting for me to fall. And the worst part was, I was still waiting for some kind of validation, some hint that this was a mistake. But it didn't come. There was no explanation, no apology, just the empty space where I used to be. By the time I left the building, I could barely feel my legs. The weight of it all, of being discarded so easily, hung around me like a suffocating cloak. But that feeling, that intense, raw emotion, was also the spark I needed. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't want to do it. I'd spent the whole night in a haze, pacing, too angry to sleep, too numb to think straight. But there was one thing I knew I had to do. I wasn't going to just walk away from this quietly. Not when everything I had worked for was thrown away without a second thought. I knew I wasn't going to get any answers from HR. They were just the messengers. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went straight to the source. The person who had orchestrated all of this. The one who had pulled the trigger on my career with a swift, emotionless decision. Mark. He was the one who had brought in the new guy. He was the one who had made the call to cut costs and streamline the team. It wasn't a mistake to him. It was a business decision, a simple matter of numbers. And the moment I saw him walking through the office the next day, past my empty desk without even a glance, I knew what I had to do. I'd given Mark my loyalty for years. He knew that. I had put my trust in him, even when things weren't always perfect. I had been there, fighting alongside him, working late nights, picking up the slack when others fell short. And this was how he repaid me? With cold detachment, and a simple, "We've decided to move in a different direction." I could feel my hands clenching into fists at my sides, the anger threatening to bubble over. It wasn't a matter of revenge. It was about accountability, about confronting the person who had taken everything from me, and asking the one question that had been burning in my chest ever since. Why? I stood up and made my way toward his office. The hallway felt longer than usual, every step heavy, the weight of everything hanging in the air. I don't know if I was more scared or more furious, but I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just business to me. This was my life. I knocked on his door, the sound sharp in the quiet office. He looked up from his desk, his expression neutral, as if he hadn't been the one to break everything apart. "Yeah?" he asked, his voice as dispassionate as ever. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it behind me. I didn't sit down. I didn't need to. I was already standing at the edge of something I couldn't turn back from. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady but hard. The words felt like they were coming from somewhere deeper than my chest, somewhere raw. Mark didn't seem fazed. He leaned back in his chair, glancing at the clock, then back at me. "I assume this is about the changes?" Clenched my teeth, the anger simmering just under the surface. "No, it's about you," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. "About the way you handled this. About the way you threw me out without a second thought." He raised an eyebrow as if he was surprised I was even upset. "Look, my name, this isn't personal. It's just business. You know how things work around here." I could feel the tension rising in my chest. The old me, the one who had always tried to be the bigger person, the one who believed in keeping things civil. That person was slipping away piece by piece, and I didn't care anymore. Don't try to make this sound like some impersonal decision. You know exactly what you did," I said, my voice rising, now no longer controlled. "I gave everything to this company. I was loyal. I was there when no one else was, and this is how you repay me. By replacing me with someone cheaper?" Mark's face hardened. "It's not about the money. It's about finding someone who can do the job faster, more efficiently, someone who's willing to take less, that's all." I could hear the words, but they didn't make sense. They felt like a sick justification, a way for him to make himself feel better about what he had done. But it didn't change the truth. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, stepping closer to his desk, leaning in, feeling the weight of the moment. "You didn't just fire me. You betrayed me. You took everything I had given, every ounce of loyalty, and you tossed it aside like it was nothing. You couldn't even give me the courtesy of an honest conversation. Instead, you replaced me with someone who's probably half my age, someone who doesn't know the first thing about what it takes to build something real here." Mark looked like he wanted to say something, to argue, but I wasn't going to let him. "Not anymore. You're going to walk out of here today and tell yourself you did the right thing, that it was just business. But you know what? I'm done. With that, I'm done with all of it. If you think you can break me like this, you're wrong." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. And I knew this wasn't just about the job anymore. It wasn't just about what he had done to me. It was about everything I had swallowed over the years. The late nights, the sacrifices, the moments. I had given up just to be part of something that had never seen me as anything but disposable. Mark didn't say anything for a moment, and I could tell the truth had hit him harder than I expected. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe realization. But it didn't matter. "I'm done," I said, my voice quieter but still firm. "And don't ever think you can do this to someone else without it coming back to bite you." I turned and walked out of his office, not waiting for a response. I didn't need one. I had said my piece. Now it was time for me to reclaim my life. The silence that followed was suffocating. I left Mark's office and stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The weight of everything, my anger, my grief, the betrayal, hung heavy around me. But underneath it all was something even harder to grasp. Confusion. I didn't feel better after confronting him. In fact, I felt worse. I wandered through the hallways like I was walking through a fog. My mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying the conversation over and over again. Had I been too harsh? Did he understand? Did it even matter? The questions kept crashing into each other, pushing me deeper into a place I didn't want to go. The truth was, I had no idea who I was anymore. In those moments after I left his office, it felt like everything I had built, everything I had worked for, had just crumbled away. I had dedicated so much of myself to that job. But now, standing there in the sterile, empty hallway, I realized something I hadn't let myself see before. I had given too much. I had given too much of myself away. As I sat in the dim-lit corner of the office, the weight of the loss settled deeper into me. There was a deep ache, a physical sensation in my chest that was almost unbearable. It wasn't just the job. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the years of my life I had invested. The moments I had sacrificed thinking that if I just worked hard enough, I would get somewhere that mattered. But what did it all amount to? A quick phone call, a severance package, a good luck email, and I was out. I glanced around the office. It all felt so empty. I had worked here so long, surrounded by the same faces, the same routines, the same unspoken expectations. But now everything felt like a hollow memory. The desk that once felt like home now looked foreign, and the people who had once been colleagues felt like strangers. My hands trembled as I stared at the empty space where my things used to be. I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing a part of myself. I had defined my worth by what I did, not who I was, and now that foundation had been ripped out from under me. The anger I had felt when I confronted Mark was still there, simmering under the surface, but now it was mixed with a deep sense of loss. How had I let it get to this point? How had I let my entire identity become wrapped up in a place that never truly saw me? I closed my eyes, trying to calm the racing thoughts, trying to pull myself together. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what came next. But even as I tried to focus on what I could do next, the fear crept in. What if I couldn't find another job? What if this was it? The thought of being irrelevant, of no longer being needed, was a knife twisting deeper into my gut. The weight of the betrayal still lingered, but it was no longer the anger that held the most space in my mind. It was the fear of starting over, of facing a world that had moved on without me. I had always thought I was in control of my life, that if I worked hard enough, things would fall into place. But now, the ground felt unstable beneath me. The future, once a place full of possibilities, now seemed like a vast, uncharted ocean, and I was standing at the edge, unsure of where to even begin. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breathing, trying to push the weight of it all out of my mind. But it was hard. It was harder than I could have imagined. The overwhelming sense of betrayal was still there. I had been loyal. I had done everything right. So why did it feel like I was the one being punished? That's when the realization hit me. I had spent all my energy on proving myself. I had spent years proving my worth, not to the company, but to myself. I had told myself that if I just kept pushing, if I just kept working harder than everyone else, I'd eventually earn my place. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to ask myself what I wanted. I had forgotten to stop and check in with myself, to remember that my value wasn't tied to what I could do for others. I looked at the empty chair, at the papers scattered across the desk. There was a flicker of clarity amidst the haze. This wasn't the end of me. Not really. It might feel like a death, but maybe it was a rebirth. A painful one, yes, but a rebirth nonetheless. I didn't know exactly what that meant, or what I was supposed to do next. But one thing was clear. I had to find my own path. I had to stop letting my identity be defined by someone else's idea of success. I took a deep breath and stood up from the chair. The anger, the fear, the hurt, they were still there, but they weren't going to define me, not anymore. I had been betrayed, yes, but I wasn't broken, and that was the first step toward moving forward. Spent the next few days in a blur. The weeks of emotional turbulence that followed my firing felt like I was wading through molasses, each step heavy with confusion and self-doubt. I went through the motions, packing up my things, signing paperwork, and getting out of the office. But there was a part of me that felt like I had left my old self behind when I walked out those doors. I tried to focus on the practical matters. The severance package was fair enough, but it wasn't going to last forever. The job market was unpredictable, and I didn't know how long it would take to get back on my feet. What had once seemed like a steady, predictable future now looked like a vast ocean of uncertainty. The first few nights I stayed up late, scrolling through job listings, sending out applications, hoping for a spark of luck. But the more I looked, the more I felt lost. Everything felt like it was just too much. The weight of what had happened, of the hurt and betrayal, was still fresh. And even though I tried to focus on what was next, I kept hearing Mark's cold, rehearsed words echoing in my head. "We found a more affordable option." More affordable. The words tasted bitter every time I repeated them. I sat at my kitchen table one night, staring blankly at my computer screen. I had sent out 20 applications that day, 20, but something didn't sit right. I didn't want another job like the one I had just lost. I didn't want to be part of another corporate machine that cared only about numbers. I had given so much of myself, and for what? I slammed my hands down on the table, the sound cutting through the quiet. No, I thought. This isn't how it ends. I wasn't going to crawl back into a cubicle somewhere, swallowing my pride just to get by. I wasn't going to let what Mark had done to me define the rest of my life. Something clicked. Maybe it was the anger, or maybe it was the realization that I had nothing left to lose. But I felt a shift in me. For the first time since it all started, I didn't feel so small. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I had been thrown away, yes, but that didn't mean I had to stay down. I had to take control. I had to be the one to drive my future. So I started to think differently. Instead of asking myself, how do I get another job? I asked, what do I want to do? Not just a job, but a life. Something that mattered to me, that was built on my terms. I hadn't given myself the space to ask these questions before. The answers hadn't been clear, but now I had a new sense of purpose. I didn't just want to work for someone else again. I wanted to build something of my own. I wasn't going to wait for a job to define me. I wasn't going to keep running in circles, hoping for validation from someone else's approval. I would be my own validation. So I did what I hadn't dared to do before. I started my own business. I had always been good at organizing, at seeing problems and finding solutions. I could help other small businesses grow, offer the same expertise I had been giving away all those years. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that, but I didn't care. What mattered was that I was choosing my path now. The first step was small. I started networking, reaching out to people I knew, letting them know I was available for freelance consulting. I built a website, started posting on LinkedIn, and reached out to old contacts. I wasn't expecting instant results, but something about it felt different than the mindless act of applying for jobs. This was something I could own. It was mine. The more I worked on it, the more I felt the pieces of myself coming back together. I wasn't just another cog in the machine anymore. I wasn't defined by my job title or my salary. I was something more. And the most incredible part, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. People started to reach out. Old colleagues and new faces alike began to inquire about my services. I felt this small spark of excitement, like a flame that had been smothered for years, suddenly catching fire again. I could do this. I could really do this. Each day, the weight of the betrayal lifted a little more. I no longer felt trapped by the past, by Mark's words, by the company's indifference. I could see a future now, one where I was in control, one where I didn't have to prove myself to anyone except me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. It's strange how the smallest moments can change everything. For weeks, I had been working tirelessly on my new venture. There were days when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I pressed on. The promise of something better, something that belonged to me, driving me forward. Every win, no matter how small, felt like a personal victory, a reminder that I was capable of rebuilding my life from the ground up. But there were still moments when the fear would creep in. What if this wasn't enough? What if the clients didn't come? What if I failed? Then came the turning point. It wasn't a big dramatic moment like you'd see in the movies. No, it was quieter. A conversation that took place late one night. I had just finished a meeting with a potential client, a small business owner looking for help to streamline her operations. And I was exhausted. She had seemed skeptical at first, unsure if I could help her in the way she needed. But by the end of our call, she was sold. She trusted me. She wanted to work with me. It wasn't a huge contract, nowhere near what I used to make. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that I wasn't chasing something impossible, that my skills had value, that I had something real to offer. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, the familiar weight of uncertainty still lingering in the back of my mind. But something inside me had shifted. I realized then that I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to have all the answers or have it all figured out. What mattered was that I was moving forward. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts I had in my phone. I paused when I saw Sarah from HR's number. The last time I had spoken to her, it had been when she handed me the termination notice. That moment was still raw, still stung. I could feel the fire of anger flare up just at the thought of her voice. But this time something was different. The anger wasn't the same. It had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been. I had taken back control, and that made all the difference. I no longer needed closure from them. I didn't need to be validated by the company that had discarded me so easily. I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that office months ago. I tapped on her name, and before I could talk myself out of it, I hit call. The phone rang twice before she answered. Hello? Sarah's voice was cautious, and I couldn't help but notice the underlying tension in her tone. Maybe she thought I was calling to make trouble. Maybe she thought I was still the same angry person I had been. But I wasn't. Hi, Sarah. It's my name, I said, my voice steady, calm. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from this conversation, but I knew one thing. I wasn't calling to complain. There was a slight pause before she spoke again. Oh, how are you doing? Good. Actually, I'm doing really well, I replied, a smile tugging at the corner of my lips as I spoke. I just wanted to let you know that I've started my own business. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her trying to process the words. That's great, actually. I mean, really good. For you, she said, her voice unsure. I could tell she wasn't quite sure what to say next, probably because she was expecting me to unload all of my frustrations onto her. Well, I continued, I just wanted to thank you for giving me the push I needed. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but they were true. Because if you hadn't let me go, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to realize what I was capable of. And now I'm building something that's mine. Not just a paycheck, not just a title. Something that matters to me, so thanks. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear her shifting in her chair, probably wondering how to respond to that. Of course, in my name. I'm glad to hear that things are going well for you, she said, her tone now more genuine, though tinged with uncertainty. I really am. I hope this new chapter brings you what you're looking for. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. It already has. We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call, not feeling the need to say anything else. I didn't need to say anything else. I had finally found peace with it all. As I sat back in my chair, I realized that the phone call wasn't just a turning point in my relationship with Sarah or the company. It was a turning point for me. I had taken control of my own destiny, and no one could take that from me again. I wasn't defined by the job I had lost. I wasn't defined by the betrayal. I wasn't defined by the anger or the hurt or the doubt. I was defined by the choices I made, the actions I took, and the strength I found in the face of adversity. And in that moment, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The future wasn't uncertain anymore. It was wide open, full of possibility. I was ready. It's funny how quickly things can change when you stop running from them. Looking back, I realize now that the hardest part wasn't losing my job or being betrayed. It was the part where I had to admit to myself that I was capable of so much more than I had ever given myself credit for. It wasn't the rejection that cut deep, but the realization that I had been living someone else's version of my life for far too long. I had given everything to a company that never truly saw me, and it took being discarded to finally see my own worth. But that was the past. The present? The present was different. I'd built my business from scratch, step by step. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, frustrating moments where nothing seemed to go right, and doubt that crept in more often than I would have liked. But there was something else, too. A sense of purpose. I was building something that reflected who I was, not just what I could do for others. I was creating a future that belonged to me, one that I could shape according to my own values and desires. And when the clients started coming in, it felt like more than just a win. It was proof that I hadn't just survived. I had transformed. The fear I had once felt about being irrelevant faded. The anger and bitterness had softened. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. One afternoon I sat at my desk, staring at the email inbox that was steadily growing. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't a flood of messages, but it was steady. It was real. I had contracts, I had repeat clients. I had built a foundation that was solid, that I could stand on. But even more than that, I had a renewed sense of self. I had found strength in the darkest places, and that strength wasn't something anyone could take from me. Not anymore. I had been betrayed, yes. I had been cast aside, dismissed as nothing more than a cost-saving measure. But that wasn't my story anymore. The story that mattered now was the one I was writing. The one that started when I decided to take control of my life, to stop waiting for permission, to stop letting someone else dictate my worth. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a familiar number, one of my clients asking for my help with a new project. As I answered the phone, a smile spread across my face. This was it. This was the moment I had been working toward. Not some grand cinematic victory, but the quiet knowledge that I had made it on my own, that I had stood tall in the face of adversity. And now I was creating something that mattered, something that would grow beyond what I had ever dreamed. And as I hung up the phone and turned back to my computer, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. This was my new beginning. I was free, free from the chains of expectation, free from the shackles of a system that didn't see me for who I truly was. I had reclaimed my power, and with it, I had a future that was mine to define. I wasn't going to waste it. I wasn't going to look back, and maybe, just maybe, I would find the courage to thank Mark someday, not for the betrayal, but for giving me the push I needed to step into my own light. The future was mine. And for the first time, in a long time, that felt like enough.